Let me introduce you to a little bit about myself. I've been married since 1978. Grew up in all over California. I lived in Southern Cal in Pasadena, Concord, Quincy. After Quincy, we lived in Barstow. Then we lived in Santa Barbara, and that's where I went to high school. And from high school, I went into the army, spent 4 years in Germany, and stayed over there after those 4 years for another 4 years, driving a truck so that I could see Europe. It was great, and so when I finally decided it was time to go home, and when I came home, my parents had moved to the Tahoe area. And so that's where I came back to and went to UNR and graduated from UNR with a major in secondary school education, with a major in German, a major in English, and a major in Spanish. And before I even graduated in Carson City, the German teacher got a job with the CIA. And so I applied for that job and I got that job and taught German for 5 years in Carson City. And then suddenly I heard about a job in Zurich, in Switzerland. I didn't know exactly where I was going to end up, but I interviewed for that job in Monte Carlo, got the job, and moved over there. Well, in 78, February of 78, we got married. In June of 78, I moved my wife and her two daughters to Zurich, Switzerland. We were over there for about 6 months. I got everything done that they wanted me to do over there, and they said, "Hey, you want to come back and take over this other department in Chicago?" I said, "Okay," so I did. Came back, was in Chicago for 2 years until they relocated their offices to Indianapolis, and we moved to Indianapolis. We were there for 6 years until my son was born, but I got into business for myself, and I was in business then for myself here in this area. Dry cleaner. I owned dry cleaners, and I bought and sold dry cleaning. I diversified at one point in time into tuxedo rentals. And so I had as many as 12 shops at one time here in the area. In 2005, we'd been with our pastor with the church that I belong to still. We'd been in 2005, so that was 15, 18. We'd been with that church for 18 years. And the pastor asked me to come to work at the church, get my minister's license, and be the associate pastor. I said, okay, because 8 years earlier, I started preparing for that. Nobody knew it, but I started preparing for that, and he didn't know it either. So when he said, "Do you want to do that?" I said, "Sure." So I had been divesting myself of all of the cleaners because I knew at some point in time that's what I was going to be doing. So I only had two left, and I walked out, closed the door behind me, locked it, and walked away and never went back in 2005. So at that point in time, it was a few months later, I'd been studying and I got my minister's license and started at the church. And in 1998, before I ever started at the church, my wife and I, Carla, we took this class that you guys are taking right now. And it saved our marriage because at 98, we'd been married for 20 years and it was not good. It was not good at all. And the main reason that it wasn't good was because of me. I was raised in a type A personality home. Are you familiar with type A, type B, type C personalities? Type A personality is typically very forthright, very outgoing, very self-centered, very selfish, very independent, very self-sufficient, a lot of very bad traits, typically, not always. So one of the traits also is that you tend to be um, think of yourself as fairly perfect. So whenever my wife would complain about me being something uh, like selfish or whatever, I would just write it off and say, no, that's not me. And so um, when we took this class, it suddenly opened my eyes to what I was doing. And within a very short amount of time, well, let me back up and say one thing. I treated my wife, I'm very sorry to say, I treated my wife like dirt. She wasn't good enough in almost all areas. People ask me, well, why did you stay with her? I loved her. Uh, I think the real question should be why did she stay with me? Because I mean I was bad. I was a real jerk, and so she when we took this class, like I said, it saved our marriage. I began to learn what I was doing and that I shouldn't be that way. And so it was very eye-opening, very aha moments, very light bulbs going on in me. And within a very short amount of time, to me it was like weeks. But my wife says, Carla says it was months. It was like 6 months before big changes really started taking place. But one of the things that happened was that it changed us so much in our marriage that we said, wouldn't it be great if we could teach this to other couples? So we began to teach it to other couples. And now, over the years, we've taught it to 342 couples, and 333 of them are still married. And so it's really, really, really good information. But in order for this information, for this class to be of benefit to you two couples tonight and to the other couples that are going to be joining us, you really have to take it very seriously. You have to do what I ask you to do. You have to do what the book asks you to do. Follow the instructions. Matt and Elizabeth, you took the class, right? Yeah. So what I'm saying, would you agree with what I'm saying? You really have to do
The
what
work.
yeah, you have to do the work. It's not a whole lot of work. Um, the real work actually comes once you have read the chapter. I'm going to introduce you to the chapter tonight, chapter 1. And then at the end of the chapter, I'll tell you all about marriage staff meeting. And then you will read the chapter, answer the questions in the chapter, and answer the questions conscientiously, diligently, honestly. I mean, don't write the answers that you think your spouse wants you to write. Be truthful, be honest with your answers. And then at the end of the week before we meet again, you'll have that marriage staff meeting and you'll sit down and you'll talk with one another about what you read, what you wrote, what you thought, what you felt in the marriage staff meeting. Now again, I'm going to tell you more about the staff meeting when we get to the end of tonight. But the thing about that staff meeting, it is a controlled environment. Um, I'm going to put Matt and Elizabeth on the spot again. The staff meeting, you get to talk about this chapter and this chapter only. You don't get to talk about other things. You don't get to talk about other problems. You talk about this chapter and this chapter only. So would you agree that it is a controlled environment where you can talk openly and honestly about this chapter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad you said yes. Would have made a difference if you said no. By the way, Ryan and Tara, if you guys have a light that can shine on you guys, we could see you, because it's so dark we can't see you guys.
Now they got.
Now we can't see you at all.
I have a light. Let me turn it on.
Okay. There, that's going to work much better.
Okay, cool. Better?
Hello.
Much better. All right. By the way, one of the things at their venue for Ryan and Tara, there was a pond there, and it was filled with trout. And all the groomsmen, when I arrived, were catching trout like mad, and Ryan.
Oh, nice.
There was some big trout in there.
Yeah, there were, surprisingly.
Awesome.
That's one of the neatest places that I've ever seen, to tell you the truth. That there was just the uniqueness of that locale. What was the name of it again? The
Greenhorn Ranch or Creek Ranch?
Greenhorn Creek Guest Ranch. Is
Yeah.
that it? Something like that.
Got bought out, so it's just Greenhorn Ranch now. But yeah.
Matt and Beth, look it up. When Google it later, Greenhorn Creek Guest Ranch.
Yeah.
We'll have to look it up.
Yeah. So, well, one of the things in the very beginning of teaching this class that happened was that I was also counseling, and I had been counseling since '98, since Carla and I took the class. We began to counsel couples, and so I one of the things that I realized was that the biggest problem that couples had was not finances. It wasn't sex problems. It wasn't discipline problems with existing families. It wasn't mother-in-law problems or father-in-law or what mother problems. It wasn't any problem except for the big problem, in my opinion, was the lack of honest, open, vulnerable communication. If you can honestly, openly, vulnerably talk with one another, you don't have problems, because you can work those problems out. So if you take one problem only and you talk about it honestly, openly, vulnerably, you can work it out. You don't want to throw in other problems when you're working on one. Okay, you work on one at a time. So I began to research communication techniques. I read book after book after book and came down with this handout that I sent you. Did you guys get my email today that I said, hey, sorry, I sent you the wrong one?
Yeah, we printed the second one.
Good. Yeah, I only sent you the first page, unfortunately. So, by the way, did you guys get your books?
Yes.
Good. And Matt and Elizabeth, you already have your books, or no, you got new ones, right?
Yeah.
Good. All right, everybody's got their books. So anyway, this handout, Communication Skills 101, is what developed out of that research. And there are the first two items on page 1 we're going to talk about for a few minutes, and then the rest of it, items 3 through 9, are very good communication skills tools that I'm going to teach you about, that I have seen over and over and over again work extremely effective. Okay, so once I teach you these tools, use them, because they will help you tremendously. So the first thing I learned when I was reading, and practically every book I read about communication, was that people communicate in 3 different ways. 10% of all communication was verbal, and there are 5 levels of verbal communication, which we're going to talk about in a minute. 10% of communication is paraverbal, which is the tone of your voice, the verbal pacing, and of course, volume. When you talk volume at someone, the first thing they're going to do is say, quit yelling at me, okay? So, and 80% of communication is nonverbal. Nonverbal is, bottom line, body language. If I am talking with you guys and you are sharing with me various things, and I have my arms crossed and I'm looking out the window and perhaps I'm strumming my arms, I got my leg crossed and I look bored, it says a lot of things to you. Body language is very, very important in your communication. That's why 80% of your communication with one another is considered a very important part of your communication. There are on pages 3 and 4 more information about body language. So we're not going to talk about that anymore tonight, except to say you're going to read pages 3 and 4 this week to learn more about body language, and pages 5 and 6 to learn about barriers that you need to avoid when you're communicating with your body. Okay, you can look very interested at somebody, and it speaks volumes. That's why, I mean, verbal is good, not paraverbal is good. To speak, speak with a nice tone, with a nice pace and low volume, but the body language speaks volumes, and it also it can be understood or misunderstood in many different ways. If I look bored when you're talking to me, you can think many different things about my appearance or my body language. And so that's why it's 80%, is because it can be understood or misunderstood. Okay? So go to page 2 now, and we'll talk about the 5 levels of verbal communication. Every relationship, it says there, is a journey through 5 levels of communications towards the desired destination of intimacy. Okay, the 4 of you want, and I think every couple that gets married wants, an intimate relationship. Now, us guys define intimacy in a very different way. Typically, it's very sexual oriented versus the way a woman defines intimacy. Okay, a woman defines intimacy as being able to talk with one another, being able to honestly and openly and vulnerably communicate, being friends, and having a very close relationship. Would you ladies agree with that? Would you add to that, Elizabeth? Or define it differently?
I'll probably turn beet red, but I think women are sexual beings too, so that's all I'm gonna say.
That's perfectly good. I mean, I don't want to reveal any family secrets, but I totally agree with you. So what I was saying was, generally speaking, I should have started out with, okay?
Yeah.
But you would also define it as being very close, right?
Yes.
I mean, you probably would not have that red-faced feeling with Matt if he were not a good friend of yours? Then it would be purely sex,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So intimacy is very important. And that's why the name of this book is called Intimate Encounters. You are looking for and you want an intimate encounter. So there are 5 levels of communication, starting with the least intimate and working our way up. So the first one is cliches, very unintimate. When you speak in typical, routine, oft repeated communication, questions, answers given out of habit with no real foresight or genuine intent, such as, how are you? Fine. Having a good day? Yes. The next level up in intimacy is facts. That's when you start relating things about the weather, the office, the friends, the news, sports, personal activities, etc. Requires no in-depth thinking or feeling. The next level up in intimacy is when you can start sharing your opinions with one another. I remember back, I don't know when it was in our marriage, but Carlos, we were talking, and I were talking about something, and I shared my opinion, and she shared her opinion, and I said to her, "That's a dumb opinion." Now, the girls are smiling, the guys are probably smiling too, because maybe they've said something like that. I learned at that time that opinions are neither right nor wrong. If you have an opinion, Matt, about something, that doesn't make it the truth, and it doesn't make it a falsity. Okay? It's only the way you feel or think about it. It doesn't make it right or wrong. And the same thing with Elizabeth's feelings or opinions. When she shares an opinion with you, it's neither right nor wrong. It's only the way she feels or thinks about it. Okay? This is typically the level at which we run into a wall of conflict. Have you guys ever experienced that? Run into a wall of conflict when you started sharing opinions? Matt and Elizabeth are smiling. Tara's smiling. Matt's got a somber look. He's not sharing any. The next level up in intimacy. The next two are extremely important because you're getting more and more and more intimate with one another. And the next level up is feelings. Having gone through that wall of conflict where you can share opinions with one another. By the way, seeing that Tara had a little drinky poo there, feel free to have a beer or have a glass of wine or a coffee or whatever. What, Tara?
It's water.
Water. Okay. Yeah, that's what I've got too, water. But recent, one of my, let me give you a quick little story here. I'll try to make it as fast as possible. I'm very revealing about my past and my history. I no longer am like this. Okay, so the reason I preface this little story with saying that is that I once had a couple that after I shared these thoughts or this story with them, they quit taking the class and they canceled their wedding with me. So you guys don't, your case is too late. You already had your wedding. I once was addicted to alcohol. I once was addicted to nicotine, cigarettes. I once was addicted to pornography. I once was addicted to gambling. I once was addicted to sex. Just about anything that you could be addicted to, I was addicted to at one point in time. Through my religion, I was cured one at a time of each one of those things, miraculously cured. I can, uh, from one day to the next, for example, on the alcohol, I quit drinking. And I was very rarely sober for about 4 years prior to that. I was never mean, never ugly, never nasty or anything, but I was constantly lubricated. Okay. So, anyway, I probably didn't have a drink for maybe 2 or 3 years, but one day somebody offered me a beer, and I thought, you know what? I'm not addicted to alcohol anymore. I can drink a beer. And so I drank a beer, and I didn't have a second one. I didn't have a third one. I didn't have a fourth one. Probably maybe 1 or 2 or 3 months later, maybe somebody offered me a glass of wine, and I had a glass of wine. So the bottom line is I was addicted. I'm no longer addicted to any of those things. Um, so you never know. I might pop open a beer one of these nights, but I doubt it, but it might happen. So anyway, you guys are welcome to. I don't judge anybody. Yeah, it's kind of funny when you are such a bad person, like I was, in my opinion. You don't judge other people. And that's one of the good things also that has helped me in counseling couples is that when they share things with me about what's going on in their lives, I do not judge. And so it's really a neat thing. But anyway, feelings. Um, let me ask the four of you, because I think all of us do this. Does does your partner ever ask you a question like the following? Is there something bothering you? Is something upsetting you? Or something bothering you? Are you upset? Um, and your answer is no, nothing. That ever happen? Uh-huh.
It does.
Okay, let me ask Tara. Does does Ryan ever ask you that question?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let me ask you a follow-up question.
Okay.
Why? What is the bottom line of why he asks you that question?
Probably because my behavior is
I
different,
can't
not
really
normal.
do that.
Oh, sorry. Let's see if this works. Is that better?
We're gonna pull you closer.
Oh wow, that's very.
Good idea. Okay, go ahead, Tara.
Probably because my behavior is different. I'm acting out of the normal. Um,
Your, what'd you say? Your face
just
is
my
different?
manners.
Your manners? Okay, that's true, but that's not the bottom line of why he's asking you. Does he love you?
Yes.
So could that be the reason he's asking you? Why is what's bothering you? Huh?
Yes.
Because he loves you.
Yes, that could be
That's
why.
why he's asking you that
Mhm.
question. That's the bottom line. Of course, there are other answers, but they don't get to the bottom line because he sees something in your face, because he doesn't want you to be upset. Lots of answers, but the bottom line is because he loves you. Okay, so if he loves you, why do you say nothing's wrong?
Because I'm stubborn.
Because you're stubborn. Oh, good answer. Absolutely, yeah. That's one reason. Another reason is you don't want to answer him right now. Okay, so we're going to learn a little bit later on, close to the end of the session, a different way of responding when your partner asks, is there something wrong? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So when you don't respond with the truth, you're not sharing your emotions with him, and he can't share his emotions back with you. Now, would you say that who would, with a raise of your hand, who would say that their partner is not very good at sharing emotions? No, excuse me. Let me put it on you. Are you very good at sharing your emotions? Yes, raise your hand. Okay.
What is? Can you do one of these?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, somewhat. Not bad. Yeah, not bad. Um, Matt and Elizabeth, it's been such a long time. I don't remember much. I do remember a few things about your wedding, but I don't remember a whole lot. But I do remember Tara and Ryan, and I do remember Ryan is a very sensitive guy. Would you say so, Tara?
Yes.
Yeah. That was my opinion of what I saw at Ryan at the wedding. I saw Ryan cry. I don't remember, sorry, Matt, if I saw you cry.
No, he didn't.
Just a little bit.
No, you
Now,
didn't.
that is not an indication of the fact that you are a sensitive guy, but I just saw in you other things that made you, in my
Did
opinion,
you
a very sensitive person. What?
Did you stay for any of the speeches?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
If I did, I would probably have a different opinion.
Oh no. No.
Oh,
It'd be the same.
okay. So,
I was crying because I dropped the ring in the grass. Remember?
oh yeah, yeah, you know,
Oh, that's awesome.
this past summer, I had a wedding at a place called the West Shore Cafe, and that was out on a pier. And the best man dropped the ring on the pier, and there were cracks like about a half inch wide, and it didn't land in the crack. Otherwise, he'd have been in the water.
Wow.
Down in about 8 feet of water to get that ring. So, but
And
yeah,
he
I
was in the
remember.
water.
That's right. Anyway, feelings. Sharing our feelings with one another is extremely important. Now, ladies, if our guys are not that good at sharing their feelings, realize that it is not necessarily their fault. Okay. They were raised that way. I think you realize that. Okay. We men were raised to buck up, don't cry, don't, you know, big men don't cry, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it behooves us men to learn how to share our feelings, and it behooves you ladies to help us do it. So let's say, for example, and let me give you a way in which you can get your guy to talk about his feelings. He comes home from work. You ask him, how was your day? What does he say?
Fine.
Good.
Fine. Okay. Do anything special?
Nah.
Nah.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, did you have any did you have a good lunch?
Sure.
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 Okay. Now, what were all of those questions? Those were all open-end questions, right? In other words, you only get a one-word answer if you ask a question like that. Now, what happens if you go a little bit further and you think, oh, I'm not getting much response out of him, and I'd like him to talk a little bit more about his day. So it goes like this. Was your boss there? Okay, this is just an example. Yeah, he was there. Um, did he say anything about your work? Oh yeah, he praised me. Oh, here we go. how did that make you feel? Okay. In other words, get to a point where you can ask a question, how did that make you feel? You see it? Okay. The last level of verbal communication is sharing our needs. We're not going to talk much about needs now because that's going to be chapter 2, a big chapter on needs, and extremely important. I think one of the most important chapters in this book is learning about our needs, not our physical needs, okay, not water, food, roof over our head, job, little sex now and then for Elizabeth. No, those are all physical needs. Sorry. I'll never say another word about it, okay? Just one time. Just one time. So, talking about emotional needs. What are your emotional needs? Affection, approval, attention, respect, security. Those are emotional needs, and they're very important to learn what your most important emotional needs are, and very important for you to know what your partner's most important emotional needs are. So again, chapter 2, so we'll move on. Go back to page 1. Then we're going to go through points 3 through 9, and we're doing just about right on time. Good. One of the things that, generally speaking, I would say more often women do than men is assume things. Okay? And it's very important not to assume, because that puts you on a totally different route, a totally different track, a totally different page than where your partner is. So it's very important to ask questions and not assume. Let me give you an example of something that I heard that happened with the Sanchez family. That's Tara and Ryan's last name. They went out on their first anniversary to a very nice dinner, candlelight dinner. Ryan bought Tara a nice little anniversary present. She bought him a present, and they exchanged presents, and they loved the presents. So it was a very nice evening. So at the end of the evening, candlelight and all, wine. Do they like wine?
She
No?
doesn't do.
Oh, what does she like?
She likes Coors Light.
Coors Light. Okay, she had at this restaurant where it's $50 for a lobster. She had a Coors Light. Okay,
Yeah, sounds right.
Classy people.
and Ryan had champagne. So they get done with dinner. They walk out the door, and they start walking down the sidewalk. And coming the opposite direction is a tall, blonde, buxomy, mini-skirted, high-heeled, tight sweater, blonde. And Ryan, unfortunately, hadn't learned his lesson yet, and so he watches this woman as she's coming and as she passes, and even after he watched her all the way. So now Tara is assuming, it begins to assume a whole bunch of things. And now it's kind of funny about positive thoughts versus negative thoughts. Positive thoughts go into our brains and they're warm and fuzzy and they're over. Negative thoughts go into our brain and they snowball, or they can snowball. Okay, so Tara assumes something, and these negative thoughts are getting worse and worse and worse in her mind. And rather than ask Ryan, why did he do that? She's just got all these terrible thoughts in her mind. Okay, she's assuming. So finally, she works up enough courage to ask Ryan, that hurt my feelings that you looked at that woman like that. Why were you looking at her like that? Now, Tara hasn't learned yet that Ryan is very big on distinguishing one Scottish plaid from another Scottish plaid. Okay. Now, this girl's mini skirt was a Scottish plaid. So he's trying to figure out why where this family came from, that plaid, what clan that was from. Okay. But Tara, she assumed all those negative things. So
She loves that plaid.
that's a little story about negative thoughts that can snowball. And of course, that was a hypothetical and actually would never occur in the Sanchez family. Brian would probably lose an ear over that one. So,
Yep.
okay, the next item, number 4, is never use the following words. I think during both of your weddings, because I think it's so very important, I talked about marriage being a relationship of unconditional love and unconditional respect. You remember that? Maybe not. Unconditional. I know it's been a while, Elizabeth. You don't have to remember, okay?
I was like, sorry if my dogs are being loud.
So unconditional means no conditions. You don't put conditions upon one another. And a conditional clause starts out with the word if. So in other words, you get if out of your vocabulary. You do not use the word if. For example, Tara would never say to Ryan something to the effect like, if you're not home on time, you're going to sleep in the doghouse. Okay? That's putting conditions upon things. You never put conditions upon one another. Okay? And I probably even said during your ceremony that the more you practice unconditional loving and unconditional respecting, no matter what, the more the flames of your love for one another will grow and never expire. Okay? So don't use the word if. Now, the other two words in the very beginning, never and always. Never and always are 100% words. In other words, if I say I never did that, I never did that means 100% of the times it never happened. Same thing with always. I'm always coming home on time. That's not true. 100% of the time, I'm not always on time. So, especially during an argument, if you say to Matt, Elizabeth, you never say you love me, Matt's going to argue. First of all, because of two things. You started out the sentence with the word you, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. You started out with the word you, which immediately puts your partner on the defensive. When you start out with the word you did this, you did that, it's going to put your partner on the defensive. Now, we human beings are made to defend ourselves. We're made like that. Whenever we are attacked, we're going to defend. So if you say to Matt, you're never home on time, Matt is going to say to you, immediately he's going to argue and say, that's not true. 2 years ago, I was home on time. Okay? He's going to argue the point. So you want to avoid the words never and always. You're always treating me like your mother used to treat me. Or something like that. Okay? Always and never. Avoid those words. Now, you have my permission realize that me giving you permission right now means that if your partner says this to you, you've got to change your ways. If your partner says to you, wait a minute, darling, honey, sweetheart, snookums, you just use the word never. You have to rephrase your sentence and change it, not using the word never or always, okay? So you have permission. Your partner is going to say that to you if you use the word never and always. Got it? Got it. Okay. The other three words, teach, instruct, and train, are kind of my personal pet peeves. And it came about when we were out at dinner with another couple, and I heard my wife Carla say to this other lady, I'm trying to teach my husband to put the toilet seat down after he goes to the bathroom. Okay? I don't like to be, especially, I don't like to hear my wife say that to somebody else. I don't like for my wife to tell other people that she's training me, that she's teaching me, that she's instructing me in manners. Okay? I think we don't do that in married couples. Okay? The next one, number 5, reflective listening. I call the Burger King technique. Have you ever heard of reflective listening? Matt and Elizabeth have. Tara and Ryan, you haven't heard of it. Okay. What happens, Ryan, when you go through the drive-in at Burger King and you talk into the little black box and you say, I would like a cheeseburger with lettuce, ketchup, pickles only, small fries, and a large Coke. What happens next?
They read back and confirm your order.
Exactly. And why do they do that?
To avoid making a mistake when you get to the window, so they don't forget anything.
Yeah, correct. Now, this technique, I guarantee you, you will probably not use. And I urge you to use it because it will keep you out of so many problems. Elizabeth, if you say to Matt, you're getting awfully nasty with me recently. Matt, first of all, because you said you, is going to get defensive. Okay? But if Matt were smart, he would say, what I think I heard you say was that there's something that I'm doing that is bothering you. Could you clarify? You see, if he responds defensively, suddenly you're in a big argument. But if he said to you, what I think I heard you say was, and that's how reflective listening always starts. If you say, what I think I heard you say was, your partner's going to know what's going on.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you're doing reflective listening and then like my partner comes back and says, okay, so I think what you said is this, but what if they are reflecting wrong? Like they misinterpreted what you're saying.
Then there was a problem at some point in time. Either what you said was not clear enough to him, or what he heard was not clear enough to him. So that's why he's repeating it back to you in different words. Very important. He's repeating it back to you in different words. If he is right, you say, yeah.
Okay.
If he's wrong, you then say, no, that's not quite what I meant. I'm sorry. I meant to say the following. Okay, so you go back and forth until the original sentence is clarified to both persons' satisfaction. It is, like I said, an extremely useful tool to keep you out of arguments. Okay? Let me ask you to do something. If you ever use reflective listening with your partner, I want you to send me an email and say, Mark, I used reflective listening today, and tell me how it went. Okay? I'd like to hear it. Because when you say, what I think I heard you say was, first of all, that clues your partner off to what's going on. And it's also going to make your partner probably giggle. Yeah, that's okay. Now I know what's going on. Okay. So it lightens up the atmosphere, but at the same time clarifies things. Okay. Good. Okay. The next one, number 6. This is an extremely mature exercise. If I asked you which one of you feels like you are the most mature person in your relationship, I think all of you would raise your hand. Oh, Tara's the most mature, Ryan?
Certainly.
Serious. Oh, that's not okay. This, like I said, this next thing is a very mature exercise. In other words, if you wish to be mature, I strongly suggest this exercise. Excuse me. Let me get water. Okay, the exercise goes like this. One of my biggest faults for 20 years was the fact that I get impatient. I'm in a fast mode. I'm just move, 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 move. So if I ask Carla a question and she doesn't, if for example I ask Carla a question and she doesn't answer me right away, I'll push her. Come on, come on, come on, come on. And she doesn't like that. She says it hurts her feelings that I'm being snitty, snotty, rude. Okay, so impatience was one of my biggest faults. I was probably impatient with Carla 2 to 3 times a day, every day for 20 years. Okay. I mean, very, very bad. And of course, I'm perfect. Like I told you, I'm perfect. So the fact that I'm doing that, I don't recognize it. Okay. So when we took this class, and Carla shared with me that I'm quite often impatient with her and it hurts her feelings. You're going to learn in chapters 3 and 4 how to ask for forgiveness when you make a mistake. So I asked her for forgiveness and she forgave me. Now, the fact that I had to ask her for forgiveness for that was a very humbling thing on my part to do. But the next day, I did it again. I was impatient again. So I had to ask her for forgiveness again. Now, I'm thinking, that's kind of stupid. I do it one day, I do it the next day. You think I'd learn? I'm a mature person. I should be able to control that. But I've been doing it for 50 years. So it was like playing the same old tape over and over and over again in my mind. I mean, when we have things that we do over and over and over and over and over again in our lives, we just continue them. And sometimes they're bad things that we do. So we need to recognize that, okay, what I'm doing is not good. I need to change. So I said to myself, I need to change. So I tried to control myself. So maybe a week later, I was impatient again, and I had to ask for forgiveness again. So I thought, okay, I'm being very impatient. I need to get better. So maybe it was like 2 weeks later, and then the distance in between got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I got better at it. And one of the ways in which I got better in the very beginning also was I gave her permission to point it out to me. Now, prior to that, 20 years of whenever I did something wrong, she would point out to me that I was doing something wrong. Now, because she was pointing it out to me, I don't need her to tell me how to do things. Okay? That was my attitude. But now, look at the other side of the coin. I have now given her permission to point out to me. It takes a mature person to sit down and say, wow, I make this mistake over and over and over and again. I need to stop doing it. I give you permission to point out to me every time I'm impatient. So she said, okay. So very lovingly, she pointed it out to me, and I got better and better and better and better. Now, if she were here right now, I would ask her the question, when was the last time I was impatient with you? And she would probably say, I don't remember. It's been so long, maybe 5 years ago. Okay. So I learned, I got better. And we're going to talk more about that particular thing in a later chapter. Okay. Number 7, share the truth in love now, not later. If something's bothering you that your partner is doing and you don't share with your partner, then it eats away at you, doesn't it? It eats away at you. You sit there, you keep your mouth shut. And it used to be that Carla and I would have points of periods of time where we would not talk to one another for 3 days to maybe up to 2 weeks. I would do something that bugged her, and so she'd just quit talking to me. And I'd say, what's wrong? She said, I don't want to talk about it. Okay. So if you don't want to talk to me, I don't want to talk to you. So we called it all our Cold War period. We didn't talk to one another. We were at war, but we weren't shooting bullets. We were at Cold War, and so we didn't talk. Now, during that period of time, it was eating away at both of us. I don't know if I shared with you. I doubt that I did because I just heard this maybe about 6 months ago. Unforgiveness. When you are unforgiving, Tara, towards Ryan, it is like you drinking poison and expecting Ryan to die. That's what unforgiveness is. You are so unforgiving, it is eating away at you, is churning away at you. You're so pissed, it's so making you so angry. Ryan could care less. He doesn't know what's going on. Okay? Unforgiveness is extremely bad, and we're going to work on that in chapters 3 and 4. So, share the truth in love. Now, how do you share the truth in love? We got a little inkling of it earlier. You use I statements versus you statements. If I said to you, Matt, you were awfully rude yesterday, that's a you statement, and you're going to get defensive, perhaps, and start sharing with me. Well, in many different ways, you could share why, which is reasoning. You could share with me the fact that I was rude first, which is attacking me back. But the best way for me to share with you that you were rude, Matt, would be an I statement. Because when I use an I statement, and when you guys, you couples, use an I statement from this day onward, when you say I feel or I felt, immediately your partner is going to know what's going on. When your partner says I feel or I felt, you know that your partner is trying to use an I statement instead of a you statement, and you are going to respond to that, to your partner in a different way. So, because when your partner uses, if Elizabeth says, I feel like you don't love me, Matt, okay? An incorrect way of responding would be to say, well, that's a dumb thing to feel. Or, I don't know why you feel that way, okay? But 3 different ways to respond to an emotion is called responding to an emotion with an emotion. Words of understanding, words of affirmation, words of comfort. Okay? Elizabeth, I understand what you said, um, and I'm sorry. So if you could help me, I will try to do better. That's trying to understand why she feels that way, okay? Words of affirmation. Of course, you may really feel like you've been a real jerk and you haven't shown her much love. And so you may say, yes, I agree with you. I need to change. Okay. Words of comfort. Typically, words of comfort come with a hug and an apology. I'm sorry. I'll try to do better. Okay. So instead of, when you hear the words I feel or I felt, you know what's happening. Respond to that emotion with an emotion. Okay. Guys, because we will probably, generally speaking, hear more emotional come out of our spouses than they will out of us. This technique will help you tremendously stay out of trouble because you're not responding in a way that totally neglects what your partner is saying. You're responding with understanding, or you're responding by affirming, or you're responding with comfort. Okay? Number 8, don't invade your partner's space. How are we doing on time? We're getting there. Okay. Don't invade your partner's space. It's Super Bowl Sunday. Carla comes in to me while I'm watching Super Bowl and says to me, can we talk? Now, everybody knows what that means, right? We got a problem here. Can we talk? Okay. Now, she has just invaded my space. I can invade Carla's space when she's getting ready in the morning and I go into the bathroom and she's putting her makeup on or doing her hair or whatever. And I say something like, have you seen my keys? I can't find my keys. I've invaded her quiet time. That's her quiet time. She likes it to be quiet, peaceful, and she plays soft music when she's getting ready. Okay. I invade her space if I do that. Okay. So that is one way to avoid problems and avoid nasty communication. Okay, the last one, use timeouts. Now, we have probably all used the following statement. When our partner comes and says, can we talk about what happened last night? And we say something to the effect like, really, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it right now. Another way we handle that is, like I used to do, she would say, can we talk about something? I'd say no, and she'd continue to ask me a question. I'd finally just walk out the door and go someplace. So I'd escape. I'd run, very immaturely run, walk out, go someplace else. If it was serious enough, maybe I might even stay away for the night or whatever, but real stupid, real immature, okay? So instead of saying, no, I don't want to talk about it right now, you can use the word timeout. Now, when you say timeout, your partner knows what that means. But there are rules to timeout, okay? The first rule is that you can't call too many, Matt. Every time Elizabeth talks to you, you can't call timeout, okay? That's too many. In fact, I would say any more than one a day is too many, okay? Now, immediately, there is no more discussion. So Elizabeth, if you ask Matt, can we talk? And Mike says, timeout. You can't say another word. Okay? I know you want to, because my wife does. She wants to. She wants to keep pushing. But every time she keeps pushing, it just bugs me further. Right, guys? Right? I mean, you've had it happen to you too, ladies? Okay? Yeah. So immediately, no more conversation. But, except for one thing, the person who called the timeout has to provide a specific, and now add this word in there that I forgot to do that. I just thought of it. Reasonable time when the discussion will restart. A specific reasonable time when the discussion will restart. In other words, Matt, you can't say to Elizabeth, I don't want to talk about it. Let's take a time out. Let's bring that topic up again in 5 years. Okay? That's not reasonable. It's specific, but it's not reasonable. Now, let's say that there could be a reason. It could be reasonable. Five years could be reasonable if you're saying, when shall we buy a yacht? Well, let's bring that discussion up in 5 years again, honey, and when we have enough money, okay?
Let's bring it up now.
Yeah.
We just can't do it now, okay? So a specific time. Now, specific time, I think, and reasonable time is sometime today. If it happens in the morning, I would say, time out. Let's talk about this after dinner. Or if it happens early evening, time out. Let's talk about it at 9:30 before we go to bed at 9:35. Okay? In other words, a specific time that you as a person who's called the timeout have to give a specific time when you will restart the conversation. And because you called the timeout, you have to start the conversation at the specific time called. So if Elizabeth says something, Matt says timeout. Let's talk after dinner about this. Then Matt, after dinner arrives, immediately after dinner, you bring this topic up again. Okay. You don't wait till she does the dishes. You don't wait till you have dessert. You don't wait 5 minutes. Immediately after dinner, because you said after dinner, because she's waiting for you to start the conversation again, rather expectantly. So you're going to start the conversation again. Now, those are the 4 rules that you have not used before, possibly, probably, that you need to use. Timeout is a very effective tool. Use it. Don't get into an argument if you're all upset right now about something. Just say, honey, wait a minute, timeout. Let's talk about this after dinner. Okay? Very effective. But you need to use the rules. Okay. The last point on this first page talks about listening, and from a book called a very good book called Communication by H. Norman Wright. Let me see if on page 9. No, I didn't write it. I need to change that. It says page 9 and 10 are all about listening. Think about this. The person who effectively listens, not hears, but listens, controls the conversation. If you think about it, that is so true. Anyway, page 9 and 10 has some very good information about listening. Listening is going to be something that's very important that you're going to be doing during your marriage staff meeting. So we're going to talk more about that later. Now, any questions about any of that now? Okay, no. In your books, on pages XIII, is the first of your assignments for this evening when we hang up here. The assignment is to read this commitment sheet out loud together. Elizabeth do too, etc., etc. Okay? Read them out loud, and if you have any questions or any comments about any one of them, discuss them. And then both of you sign and date it. Now, what I would strongly suggest is then you make it, once you've signed and dated it, that you make a copy of the commitment sheet, go to a copy machine, make a copy of it, put it on your refrigerator. I'm a visual person. So every time I see the commitment sheet on the refrigerator, I'm thinking 6 commitments. Okay? I want you to constantly be thinking about these 6 commitments you're making for the next 8 weeks. They are part of your very extremely important 8 weeks that you follow that commitment sheet. That's assignment number 1. Assignment number 2, just a second, I got to write a note. Assignment number 2 is that effective immediately, if you are not doing it, on a regular basis, you will have a date night. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a date night. It can be a date lunch, can be a date brunch, can be a date coffee, whatever, okay? It's going to be a time when you go out to enjoy each other's company. There will be no heavy discussion. In fact, I will send you, that's the note that I was writing to myself. I will send you 2 pages of date night topics, things that you can talk about when you go out on your date night. Okay? It is very important that you have a relaxing, fun time together at least once a week. So that's your exercise tonight, is to, before you go to bed, is to determine when can we have our date time. Date night, date lunch, date brunch, date whatever, okay, date coffee, okay? The third assignment, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is to set up a time when you have your marriage staff meeting. You are going to go through chapter 1, answer the questions, and then before we meet again, you're going to have a marriage staff meeting. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, do the commitment sheet tonight, set up a date night tonight, set up a weekly staff meeting time. You might want to try to maybe get your homework done within 3 days so that maybe on the 4th day you can have your marriage staff meeting. I have found that works so much better if you do it that way than trying to have your marriage staff meeting next Monday night. Suddenly something pops up. and you don't get to have your marriage staff meeting. Your marriage staff meeting is an integral part of this program. You cannot miss your marriage staff meeting. Believe me, trust me. It is very, very, very important. Okay? Now, chapter 1, page 1, bottom of the page, it talks about the fact that we human beings we have 3 dimensions to us. We have an emotional dimension, which is kind of friendship, intimacy, etc. We have a physical dimension, which is we physically experience things. And we have a spiritual dimension. Even if you're not religious, I think perhaps at some point in time, you've probably thought, how was I created? Or what's this universe all about? Or in other words, spiritual. You think spiritual thoughts, okay? So it is, I think we were created in such a way that these 3 areas of our makeup as a human being are treated equally. It is equally important to have each one of them in our lives, like an equilateral triangle. An equilateral triangle means that each side of the triangle is the same length. So you've got emotional, spiritual, and physical, okay? For example, there it is perhaps common in the marriage life of ministers, pastors, reverends, whatever, priests. No, not priests. Excuse me. Won't work with priests. That they are so involved in their ministry, which is the spiritual, that there's no time for the physical and emotional. So their wives suffer, and it ends up in a divorce. I mean, their spiritual is all get out, but there's no friendship there. There's no relationship there. There's no sex there because the guy's too darn busy. Okay. Same thing can happen in a relationship where there's not much sexual intercourse. That's the physical is missing. Same thing can happen, let's say, for example, in a relationship where one person is very spiritual and the other person is not. If they can't come to some kind of compromise, it can end up badly. So what this chapter is entitled is Assess Your Marriage Intimacy. So on page 3, it says you're going to take a few minutes to reflect upon. No, I forgot to tell you. You're going to read this chapter and answer the questions on your own. It's not a communal exercise. You don't get to do it together with your spouse. Independently, you're going to read and answer. Okay? So, reflect on your relationship. Indicate your perception of your degree of intimacy in the 3 areas of spirit, soul, and body. Place an X on the scale below to signify your view of the relationship. So the first one says the spiritual dimension of our relationship is lacking in intimacy on the left all the way up to very intimate on the right. Now, let's say, for example, that you're not, either one of you is very spiritual, so therefore your relationship is not very spiritual. So you're probably just put something down the middle, meaning it's kind of a neutral thing, right? Where another example might be is, as it was with my wife, I was a Christian, but I wasn't a very good practicing Christian, and she was. So when we did this exercise, she put like about, she put an X over very close to lacking in intimacy because our relationship was not very close in the spiritual field. Okay. Then the question asks, what aspect of your spiritual relationship would you most like to see changed or improved in your marriage? Okay. Here you're going to practice some I statements. So you might just write there right now on line number 1, I would feel. Write that on line number 1 so you don't forget. I would feel elated if we could do the following. In other words, you're going to use I statements. You're not going to use you statements and say, you're a big jerk and we don't get to do this very often. Okay? Use an I statement. Then it asks for the emotional or the friendship dimension of your relationship, and what aspect would you most like to see improved? Then on page 4, what the physical dimension of our relationship is, and what aspect would you like to see improved? Then you've got another exercise, marital intimacy inventory on page 4. And you're going to have questions. Let's take a look at page 5. Top one, number 5. My spouse is attentive and sensitive to my needs in the area of sexual foreplay. Are you going to strongly disagree with that? Or are you going to disagree with that? Are you going to be neutral on that subject? Are you going to agree, or are you going to strongly agree? So you go through all 15 questions, giving each one, circle a 1 number for each question. Now, I would strongly suggest that you, for each one of these, that you give an explanation. Sure, just something to help you remember. Let's see if I can find one. Let's see if I can find one. Okay, number 4. We seem to prioritize frequent times of quality talking and having dates together. And when Carla and I first did this exercise, I wrote 1. And guess what? She circled 1 also. Excuse me. We seem to prioritize. Yeah, we disagreed. We did not prioritize. Okay. So I wrote in the column in the margin that we do not communicate and we need to communicate better. So in other words, a brief explanation of why did I circle number 1. Okay? Because your partner, when you get to your marriage staff meeting, might ask you to clarify why. Okay, I gave number 4 a 1 and Carla gave it a 5. Why did we disagree? Okay, and we might then come to an explanation of why. Okay, then you will interpret your score and come up with the answers. And then on page 7, at the end of the week, or hopefully only 4 days away, you will have your marriage staff meeting. Now, pull this out. Marriage staff meeting. You're going to sit down with your partner, mate, spouse, and discuss when a good time would be for you to have a marriage staff meeting to discuss what you've read, written, thought, and felt about the current chapter. Step 2, set aside time each week to work alone on the exercises. Then the staff meeting comes. Set aside half an hour of quiet time together with your partner. Sometimes it might be a half an hour, sometimes it might be longer. You might want to make it an open-ended session in case your discussion should last longer. So these are the rules, like them or not. You will, in the very beginning, until you get used to it, sit facing one another in kitchen-like chairs. You cannot sit like you're sitting right now, Tara and Ryan. You have to sit facing one another.
Very uncomfortable.
Okay?
Easy.
Chairs.
Yeah.
The chairs.
You are facing one another and you move up as far as you can towards one another so that your legs and knees are interlocked. In other words, your knees are going to be banging up against his chair and his knees are going to be banging up against your chair. So there's lots of physical contact. And you might even say it's fairly intimate contact, okay? You're going to hold hands and you're going to look at each other in the eyes a good 90% of the time. Now you're going to have to look down at your book to talk about what you wrote, what you thought, what you felt. Okay, you're going to have to look down occasionally, but you look back up and into your partner's eyes. Now, if you all have permission to say to your partner, honey, you're not looking at me in the eyes. Okay? So if your partner says that to you, remember, I gave your partner permission to say that. So rag on me the next time, but not with him or her. Okay? They're going to say to you, if you're not looking at them in the eyes often enough, honey, look at me in the eyes. The physical contact, the eye contact is so very important during your marriage staff meeting. It is so hard to get into an argument of any sort with physical contact and eye contact like that. Okay? Now, if you pray, pray together, even if it's a silent prayer. Spend time discussing, this is very important, spend time discussing only the issues related to the current topic or chapter. You don't wander off into other topics. You only talk about what you read, what you wrote, what you thought, what you felt in this chapter and this chapter only. Suggestion, the male should take the lead and begin to share about his perceptions. So on page 3, where you had a little exercise, you wrote some things. Male shares first, then the female shares about her perception of item number 1, okay? So you take your turns back and forth. You go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, this is probably the second most important part besides the physical and the eye contact, and that is let your partner share his or her perceptions without you responding, interrupting, commenting, or defending your position. You do not get to do that. Like the movie, your mission, should you care to accept, is to listen. Okay? For you, as a spouse, caring and loving about your partner, your main objective during the marriage staff meeting is to gather information by listening. And your partner's doing the same thing. Now, that's just the opposite of getting into an argument and you wanting to share everything you possibly can, and you just yan, back and forth. This is one person sharing feelings. This is the other person sharing feelings, and you move on. Point number 2, okay? End your meeting by holding hands, thanking each other for having the courage to vulnerably share responses, and then pray together. Now, our times together are important because I share with you things that I have learned over 40 years. Your time in doing your homework is very important because you're doing it and you're doing it honestly. And your marriage staff meeting is the third most important time. So you got three equally important times that you need to concentrate on. If you do those three things for 8 weeks, I guarantee you're going to come out the end of the 8 weeks thinking that you have never, ever, even thought that a marriage could be this great. I guarantee it. Okay? Any questions? Went 7 minutes over, sorry.
It's okay.
I get a little bit, I tell my stories get a little long, Susan, sometimes. So in the future, for the most part, 45 minutes usual. One chapter might be a little bit longer than that. Okay? So I promise I'll make it up to you.
Okay.
If you've got my number, you got my email address, you can text me, you can call me, you can FaceTime me, you can Skype me, you can call me. If you have any questions, any comments, don't hesitate to give me a call or contact me. Okay?
Yep.
Do not get boggled down in some mire. Let me help you get through it. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
I didn't
you.
notice anybody falling asleep. So you are all really good.
But thank you. We'll
Tara,
see you next.
you're welcome. Tara, did you want to say something? I mean, Elizabeth?
And I was just saying thank you and nice to meet you, Ryan and Tara.
As
Nice to
well,
meet you.
both of you.
Stop. Take care.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye. I don't know how to turn it off.